And in an age where mainstream media is increasingly under pressure from a variety of digital news services, we need to make sure that misinformation doesn't blur the lines between fact and fiction, especially in this time of COVID-19. Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for greater protection of journalists who are providing the antidote to what he has characterized as a pandemic of misinformation surrounding the COVID-19 crisis.
Media workers are crucial to helping us make informed decisions. As the world fights the COVID-19 pandemic, those decisions can make the difference between life and death. On World Press Freedom Day, we call on governments and others to guarantee that journalists can do their jobs throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. As the pandemic spreads, it has also given rise to a second pandemic of misinformation, from harmful health advice to wild conspiracy theories. The press provides the antidote: verified, scientific, fact-based news and analysis. But since the pandemic began, many journalists are being subjected to increased restrictions and punishments simply for doing their jobs. Temporary constraints on freedom of movement are essential to beat COVID-19. But they must not be abused as an excuse to crack down on journalists' ability to do their work. Today, we thank the media for providing facts and analysis, for holding leaders in every sector accountable, and for speaking truth to power. We particularly recognize those who are playing a life-saving role reporting on public health. And we call on governments to protect media workers and to strengthen and maintain press freedom, which is essential for a future of peace, justice and human rights for all.
So, to discuss the significance of this day and pressures faced by those in the media, I'm joined by Dr Ylva Gumede, who is a professor in the School of Communication at the University of Johannesburg. Doctor, good morning. Thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Really appreciate it. My first question, as we celebrate World Press Freedom Day, what challenges do you think the media are facing in this day and age?
They are multifold, and we know that we are faced with first and foremost, a crisis, a financial crisis that are threatening media houses. And that, of course, is of a particular concern. And in the light of recent economic downturns as well, and further economic downturns, particularly in a context of South Africa after the COVID pandemic and so on, we will probably see that a lot of media outlets will falter, unfortunately. So this idea of looking for alternative business models for the media has never been more acute or more needed. But there are, of course, many other. We know that in many contexts around the world, journalists are still threatened. It's still one of the most dangerous occupations that anyone can hold. So there are numerous factors that influence and that we need to talk about on Press Freedom Day for sure.
Now, publishing or sharing fake news in South Africa is regarded as a criminal offence, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, how does one differentiate from the truth when information is coming in from so many different channels, especially as a journalist reporting on such an important matter?
I mean, of course, for journalists, we are trained to look out for misinformation, propaganda, and so forth. And I think that over the years, we've become more accustomed to actually trying to look for fake news. But you're absolutely right. We live in a world where the information sources are so many and they are multitude. And faced with a pandemic like the COVID-19, of course, the expansion of news and the flourishing of news is massive. So I think that there are a couple of things one needs to differentiate between. And I think firstly, we need to understand that how crucial information is and how crucial our journalists and news media are, actually, even for government in this particular context of the COVID-19, to get the right information out there. And to get the right information out there, we need to be sure then that we single that out from what is misinformation. And I think that's why we have a clause in the Disaster Management Act that provides then for an imprisonment or a fine for spreading of false news.
Now, when we look at a country like China, it has been accused of feeding the media limited information about COVID-19 statistics. How does South Africa compare to China when it comes to world press freedom, especially during this pandemic?
Of course, we have high levels of freedom in South Africa, and we are very mindful of the freedom of the press. I mean, coming out of a repressive history such as our own, we are very, very sensitive and have a heightened sensitive to the idea then of keeping our media as free as possible and to providing for our journalists to do a good job. And I think that it was really emphasized from the onstart of the lockdown in South Africa that the government was calling on the media and gave the media certain special liberties, as they should, to report or to keep reporting as essential essential staff or essential employees, essential services, sorry. And I think that's one thing. But then that we have this idea then of a clause that could intervene in the Disaster Management Act assessment, that you can be imprisoned or fined for spreading false news, is of course important as well, because otherwise, if we don't clamp down on false news, or fake news, we can't do the job that we're supposed to do as journalists.
Let's move it from China now to the USA. Donald Trump recently said injecting sanitizer could help with COVID-19 infections, and cases of people trying this actually was reported. Now, was it not the media's duty or the journalist's duty to differentiate the facts before reporting on this? It feels like they just reported it anyway.
You know, it's a difficult thing, because on the one hand, when people come up with things that, you know, whether they sound plausible or not is not often the case. Of course, if we hear rumors, we might report them as rumors. The problem is, how do we do that in such a way that also our audiences understand that what we are reporting on now is the occurrence of someone spreading fake news or something that's is out there in the public realm that has not been verified. So it's so important that then we can't verify our sources, that we report on them as being fake news or being rumors or whatever it might be. And I think that's also differentiating factor here. But of course, as journalists, we need to stick to our strict rules of verification, as we always should.
Doc, if you look at other African countries as compared to South Africa, where we have the sort of freedom that a lot of international countries have, what are the issues that they're facing with their governments, and how can they do better in terms of reporting?
Sorry, could you repeat the first thing you said?
Countries, what are the challenges that other African countries are facing compared to South Africa?
All right. I think that we're all facing more or less the same problems as opposed to fake news. And it doesn't help whether we have more media outlets or you know, the fake news is there, and that's a global spread. And unfortunately, what we see is not so that we have specifically South African news sources trying to spread or South African individuals or organizations trying to spread news in South Africa. The spread of fake news is often from international sources, and it spreads globally, and that's the problem.
My final question, Doc. Newspapers and magazines seem to be dying all over the world. How can these organizations and publications stay afloat, especially with things like the fourth industrial revolution upon us?
It's $1 million question, in a sense, no pun intended. But of course, we need to make sure that we can raise funds for other means for our news media. And of course, moving things online, we've been used to doing for a long time. And a lot of news media outlets that have been, those ones who have been started recently and have survived, have actually been online outlets and haven't had then maybe a print media attached to them and so on. But even for broadcast media, we're facing a challenge. And I think that there is a lot of things that needs to be done to realize how we use technology, getting used to using technology, but also having a readership that gets used to working with us in a different way. And I think that in some ways the audience have moved on quicker than we have. And as I say, we just need to find new ways of publishing news and doing so in a way that is cost efficient to us as well as our readers. But I think that trusted news sources are needed more than ever, and they will survive, and we will keep, the pressure on to have support for media in every way we can.